Tonight, quick acquittal. Former Wallabies star Curtly Beale found not guilty of sexual assault. Victoria's Missing Persons Squad takes control of the investigation into Samantha Murphy's disappearance.
I know what the hell I'm doing.
Joe Biden defends himself after his memory is criticised in a report on the mishandling of classified documents. And what lies beneath, a special report on the marine biologist who's studying the secrets of Sydney Harbour. Good evening, Lydia Feng with ABC News. The former Wallaby Curtly Beale has been found not guilty of sexual assault. The rugby union player says he's glad the truth has come out after a terrible year. It took the jury just over an hour to acquit him of all 3 charges.
With his wife by his side, Curtly Beale left court with serious allegations no longer hanging over his head.
I've always maintained my innocence. My family and I have suffered a terrible year, and I'm so glad that the truth has come out.
The former Wallaby was accused of groping a woman's bottom, forcing her to perform oral sex in a men's toilet cubicle and grabbing her hips on a night out at a Bondi pub in December 2022. The veteran of 92 Wallabies tests was arrested the next month and stood down by the New South Wales Waratahs. After a 12-day trial, it took the jury just over an hour to reach their verdict, finding the 35-year-old not guilty of all 3 charges.
It has been unbearable suffering, and it really shouldn't happen to anyone.
The trial heard from multiple witnesses, including from the complainant. A recorded phone call where Mr Beale apologised to the woman was central to the prosecution's case. But Mr Beale's legal counsel poked holes in her evidence, using footage from inside the pub to argue that she followed him into the toilets, and successfully argued that the sexual act inside the cubicle was consensual.
Mr Beale waited until he was acquitted of all 3 charges before dropping his head into his hands in a sign of relief and leaving the stand to embrace his wife.
Curtly Beale's lawyer has indicated that her client will be applying for costs. Ethan Ricks, ABC News, Sydney.
Specialist investigators are being brought in as the search for a missing mum stretches into a 6th day. Missing persons detectives have now taken the reins on the investigation into Samantha Murphy's disappearance.
A thin band of orange, the latest line of hope in the search for missing mother Samantha Murphy.
We do hold significant concerns for Samantha's welfare at this stage, and that is growing as the days progress.
After 5 days, the investigation has turned to a new phase.
This morning, the Missing Persons Squad have taken over investigation primacy in relation to the disappearance of Samantha. I can also confirm that we have not identified any suspicious or sinister circumstances.
The 51-year-old was last seen leaving her home on Eureka Street in Ballarat East just after 7 on Sunday morning for a trail run in the Woowakarung Regional Park, where the search has so far focused. Police say she had her mobile phone and was wearing a watch with GPS tracking.
It's obviously an ongoing inquiry with our telecommunications technicians.
But they remain unsure of the route she took. This is a detailed search through difficult terrain. The bushland can be dense, blocking some of the aerial searches. It's also a very hilly landscape, said to contain dams and mine shafts, meaning it can be difficult to see too far in any one direction. Miss Murphy's husband, Mick, was seen coming and going from the police station this morning. Yesterday, he and his daughter gave an emotional public appeal.
Mum, we love you so much and we miss you. And we need you at home with us.
My heart goes out to the family of Samantha Murphy at this incredibly difficult time.
Police are looking into the time leading up to the 51-year-old's disappearance as they open new lines of inquiry. Jesse Thompson, ABC News, Ballarat.
US President Joe Biden won't face charges over his handling of classified documents and has hit back at the investigators' description of him as a well-meaning elderly man with a bad memory.
A hastily arranged national address for a president who was obviously seething.
I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet.
He was responding to a new report from a special counsel who says Joe Biden retained classified documents after finishing his term as vice president. But it's the report's assessment of President Biden's faculties which really upset him. It said the 81-year-old's memory seemed hazy and he did not remember when he was vice president nor when his son Beau died.
How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business. I don't need anyone to remind me when he passed away.
But after insisting his memory was fine, he then seemed to confuse Mexico with Egypt.
The president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Up the road from the White House, the US Supreme Court was hearing arguments about whether the man Joe Biden beat at the last election, Donald Trump, should be allowed to run again. A Colorado court said he couldn't because he was an insurrectionist after inciting the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. His lawyer rejected that argument.
This was a riot. It was not an insurrection. The events were shameful, criminal, violent, all of those things, but it did not qualify as insurrection.
Attention is paid to the type of questions asked by the justices to infer which way they might be leaning. It's more an art than a science, and it is highly subjective. But there was scepticism from some justices that an individual state could determine who could or couldn't run for president under this particular section of the Constitution.
Supreme Court is a beautiful thing to watch in many respects. It's unfortunate that we have to go through a thing like that. I consider it to be more election interference by the Democrats. That's what they're doing.
For Americans, the choice is increasingly likely to be between an alleged insurrectionist and a man described as elderly with a poor memory. It's hard to know which plays worse for voters. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Washington.
Meanwhile, President Biden has called Israel's military response in Gaza over the top as he continues to press for an extended pause in fighting. Israel has begun airstrikes on Rafah, despite US warnings that any military action in that part of Gaza could pose a serious risk to civilians. 2 women and 5 children were among 13 people killed in the overnight attacks. The government says it will tweak its own industrial relations legislation to ensure employers don't face criminal penalties over the right to disconnect. The bill was passed without removing that threat after it failed to secure enough support to fix the problem in the Senate.
The matter is resolved in the affirmative. I call the clerk.
A legislative stuff-up still causing confusion.
There's fines in the Act. There's been fines in the Act since, 1907.
How is it likely that fines will be handed out? How likely is it?
None if the Liberals get out of the way.
The government's been forced to admit a bungle in legislating a right for workers not to have to respond to calls, texts and emails outside of work hours, leaving open the possibility employers could be subject to criminal penalties if they repeatedly breach the rule.
It now appears that if you run or manage a business, you can face jail time for contacting your employees after hours.
There was never an intention, in my book anyway, for a criminal penalty.
Labor had tried to remove criminal penalties, but the move was blocked by the opposition, which voted against the bill.
For the government to ask the coalition to solve its problems in a bill that is rife with problems is a bit rich.
With 6 months until the laws come in, the government's vowed to have another go. As the Prime Minister seeks to frame Labor's industrial relations reform as a cost of living relief measure for the lower paid, the opposition's signalling a new fight over the proposed national vehicle emissions standards. It's warning that forcing companies to provide more efficient vehicles will drive up prices.
I just don't know how people are going to pay thousands of dollars more.
That's a contested claim, but it's not stopping the opposition.
The Prime Minister is so out of touch that he's now proposing a ute tax and a car tax to make a vehicle more expensive for families.
No accident he chose to deliver that message in the must-win by-election seat of Dunkley. Nicole Hegarty, ABC News, Canberra.
The State Education Minister says there's been a failure of planning when it comes to getting schools in the right places. An audit has found some suburbs are desperate for more school spaces, while others are under-enrolled. While the minister focuses on the future, one notable public school has taken the opportunity to honour its past.
Here he is. Australia's first publicly educated Liberal Prime Minister making the case for good public schools.
I have always seen a strong public education system as being the bedrock of our very successful education system.
Canterbury Boys High has unveiled its new hall, named after a notable graduate.
Very nice to have a hall named after you, that's very kind.
But many of today's public school students are struggling to find a seat, and the state Labor government says planning needs to change. A government audit has found 10 suburbs where the student population has soared past what Education Department bureaucrats predicted. The biggest growth is in Schofields East. Department staff had planned for 1,500 students by 2023, but there's almost 5,000.
In those top 10 areas, every one of them is getting a significant upgrade or a brand new school.
While some schools overflow, others are over-catering. Canterbury South Public School got a $17 million redevelopment to boost its capacity, but it's still under-enrolled.
The way that we measured student projection was all wrong, and now under this government the department has been asked to do it differently.
There are so many students who need a high school at Marsden Park that the government opened this one last week using demountables, while a permanent one is built across the road.
There's going to be a brand new high school in
The government's also announced a site for the new Jordan Springs High School, which should open by 2027.
It's so exciting. We've been waiting to hear whether it's definitely going ahead.
A vital addition to a fast-growing Western Sydney community. Isabel Rowe, ABC News, Sydney.
2 years after floods ravaged the Northern Rivers, the state government has revealed where hundreds of new flood-free homes are to be built. More than 70 hectares of university-owned land in Lismore will be opened up to development, but residents still face a long wait to rebuild.
Jo Groves had her South Lismore home raised 4 metres into the air. It didn't stop more than a metre of water gushing inside the property in 2022.
It's difficult living in a house that, no matter how much you clean it, smells like dirt.
The state government has revealed the first site for a new flood-free housing development under its $100 million Resilient Lands program. More than 400 dwellings will be built on 72 hectares of surplus land in East Lismore, which is currently owned by Southern Cross University. There'll be a mix of medium and low-density properties, and 20% will be used for affordable housing.
Notwithstanding some of the red tape and some of the challenges associated with moving literally thousands of people to new suburbs and new communities, we will not walk away from Lismore.
The scheme was announced more than a year ago to find and develop flood-free land for people displaced by the disaster. With land and property not due to go on sale until 2026, it's a long wait for residents.
I feel like there's been little to no community consultation, and to be asked to wait another 2 years now is tantamount to cruelty, in my opinion.
Well, look, I can understand their frustration. It's been a long time since the flooding on the Northern Rivers, but we're determined to make this community whole.
Thousands of homes across the Northern Rivers were damaged in the 2022 floods, and people in affected communities beyond Lismore have been assured other development sites will be opened up.
There are more to come across the region because we work as a region in our flood recovery.
While the wait continues, a picture of a rebuilt city is starting to emerge. Emma Rennie, ABC News, Lismore.
A Gold Coast couple who found out their house didn't belong to them 5 years after moving in have finally been awarded millions in compensation. Jess and Jackie Moorcroft bought a Mermaid Beach home at auction in 2018 for more than $1.2 million. Last year, the Supreme Court ruled the previous owner had been the victim of mortgage fraud and still owned the property. It was decided the Moorcrofts had also been defrauded, and the state government was ordered to pay them $2.7 million in compensation, a ruling upheld on appeal.
Incredibly relieved, like it's just been such a long 6 years, and to have that original decision confirmed and unanimously was just enormous.
Sydney is not called the harbour city for nothing. 5 million of us live around it, travel on it and swim in it. But did you know there are species in the harbour that have yet to be discovered and places that have never been studied? In this special Stateline story, Jeremy Fernandez meets a scientist who knows more than most about this extraordinary body of water.
Sydney is home to one of the most beautiful natural harbours in the world. But have you ever stopped to wonder about what exactly is in it?
Most of us, when we crisscross the harbour, have really no idea what lies just below the surface. There are thousands of species in here. And I'm about to meet someone who's discovered some of those species, Dr. Pat Hutchings, also known internationally as the Worm Lady.
There, there's a worm.
Oh, there's a worm.
There's a worm.
She's passionate about worms, which she says play a vital role at the bottom of the marine food chain.
Oh, I think there were about 400 species of worms in the Sydney harbour, off the top of my head.
She was surprised to find there'd never been a scientific study of the biodiversity of the harbour. So, along with her colleagues at the Australian Museum, she decided to look into it.
We extracted all the material in the Australian Museum databases, which goes back to about 1850, of all the species of crustaceans, molluscs, echinoderms, worms and fish that have been recorded from the harbour. And we got over 3,000 species. And so there are more species of fish in Sydney Harbour than the entire Mediterranean.
And she believes there are many more species yet to be documented.
Many more to be found. We reckon, the fish people reckon there's one new species of fish recorded from Australia each week.
Every week?
Yes.
It's extraordinary.
We've come to Chowder Bay in Mossman to see what we can find.
We might see a seahorse, but we might not.
Oh, terrific. All right, shall we get in the water?
Yes, I think that's good.
It's hard to believe that in a city of 5 million people, there are still parts of the harbour that scientists have yet to study.
We're finding new species all the time in Sydney Harbour. I suspect we're looking at more like 4,500 to 5,000 species.
How do you describe the health of the harbour today?
I think it's getting better. We're fortunate. It's not because we've looked after the harbour, it's because it's a natural harbour and there is such an amazing flushing going on. The water in the harbour changes about every 2 days, but it's that constant movement of water and also the variety of habitats that are in the harbour.
From mudflats to mangroves, seagrass beds to sponge gardens, the harbour provides an astonishing diversity of habitats.
How does that compare to the sort of waterways that you find in other parts of the world?
We still get seals and things, we've got penguins coming in. I mean, it's an amazing resource and I think that to a large extent it's been underestimated. Obviously the population of Sydney is going to continue to grow, but it's probably one of the most diverse harbours in the world. Surely we have a responsibility to look after this.
Beat today in the office, that's for sure.
And tomorrow we'll take a look at the traces of the harbour's Indigenous history still visible today. A hitman has been sentenced to 32 years in jail for the murder of a Newcastle grandmother. Stacey Klimovich was gunned down in Stockton in 2021 after answering a knock at the door in what the sentencing judge described as an execution-style killing. A jury found hitman Jason Paul Hawkins had travelled from Canberra to kill her. Hawkins was recruited by the victim's now-dead former son-in-law, Stuart Campbell, who had threatened Ms Klimovich after she slapped him during an argument months earlier. Hawkins' getaway driver, Stephen John Garland, was also sentenced today to 8.5 years behind bars. Former Manly coach Des Hasler has fronted a coronial inquest into the death of the Sea Eagles player Keith Titmuss. Experts have told the inquest Titmuss died from exertional heat stroke after a pre-season training session run by Hasler in late 2020. Hasler told the inquest he didn't believe the session was especially strenuous. He said he was heartbroken by the loss, adding that the 20-year-old player was highly respected. The inquest will continue next week. Almost 2 years after the collapse of funeral insurer Youpla, the federal government has stepped in to provide support for thousands of First Nations people who lost out. Indigenous Affairs reporter Kirsty Wellauer has the story, and a warning: this report contains images of an Aboriginal person who has died.
2 years ago, Nikki Foy and her mother took up the fight for justice after losing tens of thousands in funeral insurance premiums to the now collapsed Youpla Group.
I'm just really disgusted in how they targeted us. It was targeting vulnerable people, vulnerable communities, you know, across the nation.
While her mother did not survive to see this day, Nikki and her family are now one of 13,000 people who will recoup some of what they lost.
I hope families who are eligible can find some relief in the long-term resolution.
The federal government has announced a $97 million support program.
This is a very important recognition of those that were affected by this so-called Aboriginal Benefits Insurance Scheme.
From July, anyone who held an active policy on or after August 1st, 2015 is eligible for a bond or cash payment. They'll get either 60% of all payments made or the benefit amount of the ACBF certificate, whichever is lower.
I think it's a fair outcome for something that's caused harm to community for decades.
Concerns had been raised about the company for decades, including multiple court challenges by regulators for false and misleading conduct and for breaking anti-hawking laws. Despite this, they were allowed to deduct money from customers' Centrelink accounts for 16 years.
If there was a problem with that company, then the government should have removed them from Centre Pay early, and they didn't.
The government's scheme will run until June 2026, easing some of the pain and suffering. Kirsty Wellauer, ABC News.
Australia will introduce an armed drone into military service this year, but details of the secretive project are being tightly held by government. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
At an undisclosed location, which looks very much like the Woomera testing range, a locally developed combat drone is put through its paces. While in Canberra, Australia's groundbreaking GhostBat program receives a $400 million funding boost.
This technology has the potential to turn a single fighter jet into a fighting team.
First unveiled back in 2019 as the loyal wingman, the unmanned MQ-28 harnesses artificial intelligence to target enemies while flying alongside traditional crewed aircraft into battle.
We absolutely understand that manned-unmanned teaming is part of the future of air combat.
Overnight in the United States, a strikingly similar-looking product has just been unveiled. 2 years ago, the former government cancelled an order for American-made armed drones. With the war in Ukraine highlighting the importance of uncrewed systems, there's now a rush to introduce the deadly technology here. And work's underway on a secretive new program.
We are introducing into service an armed drone this year. I won't go into details.
The minister insists the details must be kept secret for now on security grounds. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia's biggest steelmaker and the nation's largest miners are teaming up in a new pilot to speed up the move towards carbon-free production. BlueScope, Rio Tinto and BHP will investigate building an electric smelting furnace that can resolve problems with lower-grade iron ore from the Pilbara. The pilot facility could be commissioned as early as 2027. With the rest of finance, here's David Chow.
Even though the Reserve Bank governor has warned interest rates could still rise, the odds are they probably will come down by Christmas. As we heard from Michelle Bullock, the RBA is not expecting to wait until inflation actually falls inside that 2 to 3% target range. After all, her counterparts at the US Federal Reserve have openly said they plan to cut interest rates 3 times this year. So if the world's biggest economy makes such a drastic move, it'll be pretty tough for Australia to go the opposite way. Now, the RBA is worried about services inflation, as too many of us have been getting haircuts and dental checkups, apparently. But economists from Commonwealth Bank reckon we should be focusing more on how inflation is going for essential items, the things we have no choice but to keep buying no matter how high interest rates climb. And 13 rate hikes have done almost nothing when it comes to limiting the price rises for housing. In particular, building a new home, rent, electricity and insurance, which is where the government should arguably do more with fiscal policy. Meanwhile, it was a quiet day for the share market, which ended flat as gains in healthcare and property offset losses for uranium stocks. And the All Ords is down 0.6% for the week. Overseas, the S&P 500 crept to a new record high, while Japan hit a 34-year high. And Chinese markets were closed for the Lunar New Year. Oil prices jumped 3% on lingering concerns about Middle East supply disruptions, while the Aussie dollar is buying just under 65 US cents. And that's finance.
Australia has added fast bowler Michael Neser to an otherwise unchanged Test cricket squad for the tour of New Zealand. Neser was last summer's Sheffield Shield Player of the Year. He's been recalled after West Australian quick Lance Morris was ruled out through injury. The Australian Opals have taken a big step towards qualifying for the Paris Olympics with a 60 to 55 point win over Brazil. 42-year-old veteran Lauren Jackson played more than 8 minutes and added a 3-pointer early on. Australia led by 14 points in the second half before hanging on in a tense finish. The Opals need to finish third or higher in their 4-team group to qualify for Paris. And to the weather now. And Tom, the recent rainfall from Cyclone Kirrily could fill up Lake Eyre.
Yes, Lydia, the dry lake in South Australia occasionally fills with water following heavy rain over Australia's eastern interior. Now, the lake's catchment extends well into Western Queensland and through the Northern Territory, but the low annual rainfall and high temperatures and evaporation across these regions prevents a permanent flow of water. However, Cyclone Kirrily's slow path over inland Queensland brought heavy rain in late January. That was followed by further heavy rain in early February. As a result, around half the catchment has received more than 100 millimetres so far this year. And satellite imagery from the Copernicus program shows the rivers are now running over southwest Queensland. Now, this was the Channel Country a month ago, and this was yesterday. The Diamantina River in full flow, and those waters are heading south to Lake Eyre. Sydney worked to the coolest morning in 2 months, a low of 17 in the city. Southerly winds and low cloud then kept the high to 24. That was 2 below average. Parramatta reached 25 and Penrith 29. Statewide minimums were as much as 8 below the average. It was down to 6 in Mossvale. Maximums today were generally within a few degrees of the average for most regions. Now on the satellite, well, a band of cloud remains over the northern part of our state. Ballina had 34 millimetres to 9 a.m. Glen Innes picked up 9 millimetres today. On the chart tomorrow, a wetter pattern is developing for eastern New South Wales. We've got a new high that's moving over Tasmania. Now the winds blow anti-clockwise around highs, and that means a moist flow pushing onto the coast. Around the country, well, the Perth heatwave continues. 42 today and they're climbing to 41 tomorrow. Brisbane showers and a storm. For the northeast, a high chance of showers for all regions to start the weekend, and the risk of thunderstorms for the inland and the lower Hunter. Now, the cloudy and showery weather is forecast to linger into Sunday. For the southeast, a high chance of showers along the coast, gradient to a medium risk for the eastern ranges. A coolish day for summer, only 18 in Braidwood and Bowral. To the west, the slight chance of a shower or storm along the northern half of the slopes, but it's looking sunny elsewhere, tops in the mid-30s. On the waters, strong winds developing off the central stretch of the coast and seas to 2 metres. Now for Sydney, a shower developing tonight along the coast, then a shower or two tomorrow for all suburbs. We'll have south to southeasterly winds up to 30 kilometres per hour. Temperature range 21 to 26 for the city, 19 to 25 for much of the west. The sun will rise at 6:23 and it's setting at 7:55. And ahead, well, a shower or two again on Sunday for Sydney, 25 to 26 degrees. It will be a warmer day on Monday. We're climbing from 29 to 31. There's a slight risk of a late shower or storm. Warm again on Tuesday with the possible storm for the outer west in the afternoon. Then a high chance of showers and storms arriving on Wednesday. That's with a southerly change in the afternoon. Behind that change, further showers Thursday and Friday. Lydia.
Thanks, Tom. And that's all from ABC News. Enjoy the rest of your evening.